Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. Today, we're continuing our ongoing coverage of the war between the Russian Federation and the Ukraine. Now, overnight, within the last 24 hours, the Ukrainian military has launched a massive drone attack deep inside the Russian Federation. Dozens of sites were attacked by largely very inaccurate drone systems. It appears that these systems that the Ukrainians launched were really purposed, designed as a terror campaign against the Russian civilian population. Here is an article coming out of Canada. Ukraine strikes Moscow in biggest drone attack so far. And it was also coming off Reuters as well. Ukraine struck the Moscow region on Tuesday in its biggest drone attack so far on the Russian capital, killing at least one woman, wrecking dozens of homes, and forcing around 50 flights to be diverted from airports around Moscow. Russia, the world's biggest nuclear power, said it had destroyed at least 20 Ukrainian attack drones as they swarmed over the Moscow region, which has a population of more than 21 million and 124 more over 8 other regions. At least one person was killed near Moscow, Russian authorities said. 3 of Moscow's 4 airports were closed for more than 6 hours. 50 flights were diverted. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov told reporters that the drone attack was another reminder of the real nature of Ukraine's political leadership, which he said was made up of Russia's enemies. There is no way that nighttime strikes on residential neighborhoods can be associated with military action. And he does have a point. Now, look, if we would have seen other strikes, for instance, if the Ukrainians would have also launched cruise missiles along with this drone saturation strike, I could see the rationale for launching these drones. The drones would be used essentially to cause the Russians to expend their air defense missiles. It would clutter radars. But that's not what the Ukrainians did. The Ukrainians did not launch cruise missile attacks or hit any sort of military targets. They used these drones to attack essentially civilian neighborhoods throughout Russia, and you can see at least one very large apartment building in Moscow that was severely damaged by these drone swarms. Now, look, these are not very large drones. These are small, very slow-moving drones that don't have a great deal of accuracy. Again, they're more or less terror weapons designed to bring the war to the citizenry of the Russian Federation. And that appears to be the purpose right now, at least one of the objectives of the Ukrainians. Now, I think what the Ukrainians are ultimately doing is going to try and set the precedence of attacking Moscow. So if we hear about drone strikes hitting Moscow and other regions of Russia, well, it becomes the new normal as far as the mainstream media here in the United States and the EU. Now, that will lead to eventually the Ukrainians using more precise weapon systems, such as the JASM, possibly the Storm Shadow, and other long-range, even ballistic missiles. The Ukrainians are testing ballistic missiles right now to be used in all probability against targets in and around Moscow. Now look, at the start of this war, given the fact that these are two very large industrialized nation states, yeah, the Ukraine has massive industry, as does Russia, and then given the support that the Ukrainians have in terms of direct military support from NATO, from the United States, that is only going to exacerbate the capabilities that the Ukrainians have when they're attacking targets inside of Russia. So this is going to expand. This is going to become eventually, in all probability, the war of the city. So how are the Russians going to respond? Look, the Russians could do an immense amount of damage to Kiev and other cities around the Ukraine. And I think at this point, the Russians have been fairly hesitant about launching a terror campaign against the Ukrainian civilian populace. I mean, if you look at the casualty reports on Russian missile strikes, you can see that most of those strikes are against military targets. The Ukrainians report a couple of civilian dead in terms of collateral damage, and they don't report on their military dead. So you don't really know what the effect was of a certain Russian missile strike. We get reports, we can see information in regards to the burying of Ukrainian troops, funerals, what have you. But it's still very, very difficult to ascertain the success or lack of a success on a certain Russian missile strike. Now look, if the Russians switch gears and decide to launch a bombing campaign against civilian targets, the casualty rates would be astronomical. So if the Russians had decided to do what the Ukrainians just did over the past 24 hours, they would absolutely destroy a Ukrainian city. They have that capability in terms of using much larger glide bombs and munitions against these civilian targets. But they're not really doing that. Again, that's not to say that civilian casualties aren't happening. They are, but by and large, the Russians don't want to turn the Ukrainian people against the Russian Federation. I don't think they want to do that, and they're trying not to do that. But at the same time, how are they going to respond to these strikes by these drones? Now, look, these drones are just not coming from the Ukraine. This drone technology is coming from the Baltic states. Lithuania, Estonia, Latvia are contributing to this conflict. Obviously, Poland and Western European nation states, Asia, South Korea are providing this drone technology to the Ukrainians. So again, how do the Russians respond to this? Especially when you have nation states such as the Baltics. Again, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, incredibly bold in terms of their commitment to the Ukrainian war effort. They have given the Ukrainians quite a bit of their own military assets. And unfortunately for the Baltics, they are in a very precarious situation to be angering the bear, right? So if Russia were to decide that the support of the Baltic states has reached a point where they have to reassess direct military action against the Baltics, the Baltic nation states, Estonia, Latvia, are putting themselves in an incredibly precarious situation. Not only one, just getting themselves involved in this conflict, but secondly, giving them the Ukrainians the equipment that they would ordinarily use to defend their own nation state. Now look, the Baltics are doing this because they feel emboldened. They believe that because they are part of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, that NATO would come to the defense of the Baltic states in case of a Russian military operation against the Baltics. But would they? Would that happen? If the Russians were to decide to launch a all-out blitz invasion of the Baltic states, and let's say that hypothetical invasion was a success, would Western Europe come to the aid of the Baltic states? Would the Germans, would the French, would the Poles, would people in the United Kingdom be willing to send their sons and daughters to retake the Baltic states? Would the United States be willing to do that? I don't know at this point. I don't know. I believe that Some would, and I believe that some would not if war broke out between Russia and the Baltic states. But again, this is one aspect you have to look at because of the military technology, because of the weapon systems that the Baltics are providing to the Ukraine. I mean, it's happening. And now you have the Ukraine attacking Moscow with these really essentially unguided drones designed to be used as terror weapons against the capital of the Russian Federation. I mean, there's going to be a response. It's going to happen. Now, will this war escalate? Probably. I mean, that's the way we're heading right now. That's the way it looks, the route that we are currently taking. Look, the conflict is not de-escalating. No one is talking about a reasonable solution to this war. That is completely off the table. Now, this is all-out war right now is what we're saying. Now, as I've talked about escalation and the way the conflict progresses, there will be more attacks against the Russian capital. Look, the Ukrainians are getting desperate. The Ukrainians are losing in the Donbass offensive. The Russians are about to collapse the southern sector of the Donbass offensive in the direction towards Pokrovsk. This area here is getting ready to just utterly fall apart. And the Ukrainians are desperate. So in desperation, they are launching this terror campaign against the Russian civilian population in hopes to turn the Russian civilian population against the conflict. It's not going to work. It's going to do the opposite. It's going to harden the Russian population. And I don't think the West gets that. I don't think the West truly understands how vested the Russians are into winning this conflict. They fully understand they cannot have a NATO-allied state taking over the Ukraine. They simply can't. They will not allow it. And in these kind of conditions, the war is just going to escalate. And again, as I've talked about before, we're on that pathway to global war. It's on the way. I mean, this war is not very old in the grand scheme of wars. Look, the Iran-Iraq War lasted 8 years. Look at the length of World War II, World War I. And I still think we're kind of in the pre-stages of what could be a global war. And that's going to be the United States, certain Western European powers fighting against the Russian Federation, Belarus, and the Chinese, and Iran. That's the way we're heading right now. We're creating these two alliances that have formed, and right now they're on track to engage in global war. That is the track we are on right now, and it is a very robust, firm track. This is not a track that is easily gotten off of. It's just not. And that's the track we're on. And unfortunately, it's going to continue to escalate. And this is just the start of what we've seen over the last 24 hours of this Ukrainian attack against Moscow and cities all throughout Russia, really, of these really ineffective terror weapons, these drones. And eventually, I think we'll start to see the Ukrainians use actual U.S. weapon systems to target or try to target Russian facilities deep inside of Russia. And then what happens? Well, we're just going to have to wait and see. But look, if I were the average American citizen, you need to prepare for what's coming. You really do. And I'm kind of getting off track here a little bit, but I really see what I call the uninformed urbanites walking around in apogee, completely oblivious to what's happening in the world around them, completely unprepared for what could happen. And we could rapidly go from a society that you pick up your smartphone and you can have a steak or or a bottle of liquor delivered to your home within 30 minutes, to something in which toilet paper becomes very difficult to obtain. We could go to apogee, to basically anarchy and chaos very quickly. Very quickly. This is a very soft system that we are operating in right now in the United States. It's very weak, very soft, and could easily be damaged and destroyed in the blink of an eye. And I don't think the American people are ready for what's to come, because it's coming. Believe you me, it is. All right, that's what we have for today. As always, thank you for joining us. Have a good day.